Today's edition of our AM Minnesota program. Susan Garwood is with us. She's the Executive Director of the Rice County Historical Society and its museum. And Susan, first of all, I'd like to publicly thank you for allowing me to stop on out the museum earlier this week and visit with Bruce Smith's sister and his oldest daughter.
Our pleasure,
awesome.
and you know that you're welcome anytime, Gordy.
It was so cool to visit with those ladies.
Yeah, they're neat, wasn't it?
Oh, well, they oozed Bruce Smith's class. Now, I never obviously had the chance to meet Bruce Smith.
Neither did I, of course.
I was 11 when he passed away.
I think I was 1.
You know, so I never had the opportunity to visit with him, but everything you hear about him from people around here like Dick Carlander and Buck Burkhartsmeyer, people that knew Bruce Smith, say that's exactly how he was. He oozed with class.
And humble, a down-to-earth guy. Yeah, neat. He sounds like it would have been really neat to know.
You know, and his daughter said she didn't know anything about his athletic prowess until after he passed away.
That's that humble thing. Yeah, absolutely. He had lots of reason to brag, but didn't.
But we're here to talk about your activities on your end of the fairgrounds next week, primarily, although I've got a little question here I wanted to get resolved, if you don't mind.
I'd be happy to do that.
You showed me a book, a ledger, out at the fair, and I appreciate that too, of the initial minutes of the Fair Association.
Yeah, it was one of our earliest objects that was added to the Historical Society back in 1926 when we first got started. And it's a ledger book that is the handwritten constitution of forming the Rice County Fair. Actually, it was called the Rice County Agricultural Association,
right,
with the purpose of hosting a county fair. And that it was signed by, you know, who's who of Rice County, because not just Faribault names, but John North's signature of Northfield is on there. And it was signed in 1858, which would make it
that we became a state.
The same year we became a state, so that would be 158 years ago.
Right, and the fair book says that this is the 143rd annual, and I'm assuming that's the key word there, annual Rice County Free Fair.
Absolutely. There were, in fact, that very first year they were formed in the spring, early spring of 1858. And then that summer they were hit with crop failures and economic failures and so on. And by mid-July it was clear that they could not afford and they were not in a position to actually hold a fair. So the organization existed in 58, but they didn't hold a fair that year. They did the next year and subsequently, but then again in 1862 at the U.S.-Dakota War, when that outbreak was happening, they canceled the fair again. So there may have only been 143 actual fairs, but the organization and fairs have been happening for closer to 157, 158 years.
Okay, I suppose they wanted to.
Well, the word annual, you're right, the word annual implies that it's happened every single year without a break.
Which means that it still happened during World War II.
Right, and it may have. I honestly don't know. But it'd be interesting to talk to the Rice County Ag Society to figure out how better we can phrase it to capture all of the years that they have been doing.
Well, for example, you said it started in 1858.
Right.
So that would mean a big anniversary coming up in 2 years.
Well, exactly. And what was neat about that 1858, 59, those years, and this book has all of the premiums that were listed, all of the things that they were having the competitions for, and it looks just like today's premium book. It was all of the animals, it was the foodstuffs that you grew, the plants and so on. It was the arts and crafts, although not photography, because photography was brand new and not something anybody did, but definitely artwork and the handcrafts. And all those things that we think about as Rice County Fair has been happening.
Yeah, it wasn't just agriculture.
Right, absolutely. Whole families involved. And
Northwood, Iowa. Rice County Fair is coming up next week here in KDHL's hometown of Faribault. We invite everybody to come to our hometown and enjoy the great Rice County Fair next week. Rice County Historical Society has quite a milestone coming up this year. This is your 90th year of existence, right,
It
Susan?
It is, absolutely. We were started in 1926. And we first had our earliest conversations about being an official organization in March of 26, and then the final organizational documents were signed in November of 26. So that has been our bookends this year of celebrating our own anniversary. And so we started with events, like I said, on the 19th of March, where we had our kickoff, and then we've had events throughout the year, continue to do so until the signing day, which was November 10th, and that'll be a Thursday this year.
Now, if my memory serves me right, and memory is not one of my fortes as I get older, Faribault, I think, was incorporated in 1856, a couple years before we became a state. Northfield?
55 for Faribault, 56 for Northfield.
Oh, okay, I got them reversed. So 55 and 56 are when those cities are incorporated.
Correct. But Alexander was here much earlier than that.
Sure, Alexander Faribault, yeah.
Yep, and there were the Faribault House and all of that was beginning to be settled. The county existed as early as 1853, and so some of those early days, once we became a territory in 1849, it was clear where we were headed. We were going to become a state, and so there was all kinds of governmental organizations defining the boundary lines and all those kinds of things that cropped up.
So we're talking about maybe, 77 years later they decide to do the Historical Society.
They did, but there had been an organization prior to that. The Old Settlers Association, when it first was started, you could only be considered an old settler if you had been here by 1858. Can you imagine that they thought they had enough? But no, they extended it that as long as you were in Rice County by 1860, then you qualified as an old settler.
Oh, okay.
And again, I still think that's kind of wild to think about how long ago. At any rate, the Old Settlers Association met and were very active throughout the 1800s. But by the mid-1920s, they realized, well, I'm sure they had realized it before then, but it became very clear that they were phasing out. You know, if you had to be here by 1860, the numbers of people who qualified were fewer and fewer. But they knew that Rice County's history was so wonderful that they wanted to keep that going. So there were a couple of different meetings between the Rice County Old Settlers Association, the Northfield Old Settlers Association, they have their own, as well as the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, for the area. They met, they talked, and they decided that a new organization called the Rice County Historical Society should be formed. And then there are, again, looking at those names, there are several professors from Carleton and St. Olaf College, priests and other leaders here in Faribault. It was truly, again, a whole county organization. And they were formed officially in 26. They were looking around for the right spot. They strongly considered Northfield as the place to be, and eventually selected by the end of that time period between March and November of 1926. They settled in on Faribault and had a small space at the courthouse at first. And then when the new library was built, it's the Buckham Memorial Library. It was
which
new.
is old now, but
right, exactly. In 1930, they moved into that, which was poignant because and pretty amazing timing, because the following year, so the Historical Society's collection, all the Old Settlers Association records, etc., were moved into the library. The following year is when the old courthouse burned. So I hate to think about what had happened to those earliest records. I mean, it was horrible for the courthouse for sure, but from our own perspective, from the Historical Society, some of the earliest records, like this Rice County Fair book, may have been lost if they hadn't moved into the library.
Oh, bummer. Now, if people want to see this, the Fair book,
yes,
they can stop out and do that? Or
they can. The Fair book is, as you can imagine, one of our most delicate and well cared for pieces in the collection. So when you come to that, you have to view that in our rare book room.
Okay.
It's where we have the research room, which is a little bit more casual, and people can come in and we pull out records and people can look through those without too much supervision. In the rare book room, you have to leave your purse. We provide the paper and the pencils, You gotta wear gloves, all those kinds of things when you look at these books. But yep, people for sure can come take a look.
And your expansion last year didn't include some area that has temperature control so you can preserve these even better?
Yes, absolutely. Our collection storage space, it's amazing. It has been transformative for the things that we can collect and how we can store them. Yep, it's temperature and humidity controlled, and it is of course locked and alarmed and all those kinds of secure measures as well. It's beautiful.
Yeah, right. Now that used to be, the original building used to be a garage for the county, didn't it?
That's correct. It was their street or their highway department building. Yep. And then in 1974-75 they built a new one, and when this building was vacated, then we petitioned for use of the space, and by again late fall, October, November of 1975, we signed a 99-year lease with the county.
Well, that's
so
cool.
Still a county building, but we're really lucky to be in there.
And the expansion, of course, occurred last year, so this year you have a better idea, a better handle on how to utilize that space for this year's fair.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm so glad you mentioned that. We have a teaser for an upcoming exhibit. A small exhibit space will be in there. But the big feature that we're having in that room, two things. Throughout the fair, we'll be actually showing home movies from 1937. We have a volunteer who was at one of Woody Schroeder's auctions a while back and bought a box of home movie reels. It had been a part of Charles Fleckenstein's collection. And
this is the Fleckenstein.
Yes, indeed, it is, of the family. And he had those filmed, we had them put on DVD, and they are home movies of the Fleckenstein family. Everything from digging the tunnels when they were expanding over at the brewery, to the golf course, Southern Heights Golf Course, and then the old airport when it was apparently out by where the new Divine Mercy Church is now.
I didn't even know there was now.
I didn't either, to be honest with you. And parties and events and so on. So we had for our kickoff event on the 19th of March, we had condensed all of these movies into about 11 minutes. But what we're going to show throughout the fair are the raw footage, which is about almost 2 hours of home movies of Fleckenstein family, but also of the whole community. And so we're inviting people to come on in, sit for a little bit, come and go, so it'll be on a loop and run throughout the fair. And then on Thursday, which is Senior Citizen Day, we are inviting anybody who is 90 or older, and any of our previous board members and volunteers to come on and have birthday cake with us, Senior Citizen Day. And so that'll be in the new meeting room space at the back of in the addition space. And that's going to be from 1 to 4. And we know that some will be over at the Senior Center, or excuse me, having the dinner and the Volunteer of the Year, Senior of the Year award. But then if you're there, come on over afterwards and again, join us for a piece of cake.
Yep, last year's award recipient, Pat Rice, went on to win the state award too.
I know. Well, Faribault Rice County really has some pretty amazing people and great volunteers. I know we're certainly lucky to have our group who make this whole fair weekend happen. Everything from the rearranging of and setting up of displays to the demonstrators that we have.
Can't remember if it was last year or the year before. You just kind of run together as you get older, Susan. You'll know that when you get older. Susan Garwood's with us, Executive Director of the Rice County Historical Society, but I can't remember again if it was last year or the year before. But I remember going over into your area of the fair and seeing the kids, and somebody was doing teletype with them, and they were so fascinated by the teletype in today's world of cell phones, of course.
Exactly. And we'll have somebody doing that as well. We also have set up a telephone, an old crank telephone. I never experienced those, but I certainly have heard lots of stories where the number of rings that you have on a party line figures out whose phone call it is. That doesn't mean that everybody on that line your neighbors and all the way up aren't going to pick up the phone and find out what the news is,
But
too.
they could.
But they could, for sure. So we have that set up where you can actually make a phone call from one old-time crank phone to another. We'll have all kinds of other demonstrators as well. We have somebody demonstrating. We actually have the faribault peacemakers who are going to be doing quilting. We have some tatting demonstrators, embroidery, soap making, that'll be on Saturday, hand crank sewing machine, wood carving. By the way, back to that hand crank sewing machine. Literally, that means that in addition to, I don't know if you've ever sewed, Gordy, may have.
Myself?
Home ec?
Oh,
Yeah.
well, they sew buttons with a needle.
Right. Well, this is with the
But not a
sewing
machine.
machine.
Yeah.
Well, I've sewn a little bit, and I'm more used to where you have two hands, you're kind of controlling the fabric, that sort of thing. Well, this one, you can only have one hand controlling the fabric as you feed it through the machine, because the other hand, you're cranking it.
Yeah, I
with
remember
your
watching
hand.
Mom do that, so she had one back in the day.
So I think that's just the talent involved in that's pretty wild. So you get to see that in action. We have some wood carvers out there. We'll have, like I said, the crank telephone. We have blacksmiths are coming again Wednesday through Saturday.
That's always fascinating. I always enjoy going and talking to blacksmithers because it just amazes me.
Well, and they're so neat. I mean, they're a neat group of guys, and they talk through it. You can ask all kinds of questions about what they're doing and how they're doing it. It's a portable forge that they bring in, and so on. And then, of course, we'll have spinners there and knitters and some flint knapping and Maytag washing machine, which sounds really boring, except that this one is gas powered. So there's an engine that runs it, just like your car.
I remember when my mom got her first automatic washing machine. She used to, the old crank thing, they would roll through the rollers.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'll bet you that addition in your house made laundry rather than something that was an all-day or sometimes two-day activity to something that must have been amazing because she put it in and she could walk away.
And what I get a kick out of is nowadays, of course, front end load.
Right.
Front end is the thing.
Right.
Well, Dad, because my mom was so short, she was like 5'1", Dad built little tables for the washing and the dryer, washing machine and dryer, to stand on, and it turned them into front, basically.
Well, it's convenient, I'm quite certain. So that's pretty cool. I just want to say something is that at the fair, a lot of the folks who are demonstrating and performing and so on are paid. Our demonstrators are all volunteer. The blacksmiths, the knitters, the quilters, flint knappers, everybody out there is giving their time because they really think that it's important for people to see what the past was like. By the way, we've heard from a lot of parents and grandparents that they come to the fair to see the whole place, and time and again the kids are so engaged in what's happening over in front of our log cabin that they never get anywhere else in the fairgrounds.
Oh, I believe it. And I thought it was a brilliant move a couple of years back when the fair put the smaller kids' rides at your end of the fairgrounds.
Absolutely, and we're happy to have them there.
Because they don't get mixed in with bigger kids.
Right, and they're, play with some, try your hand at some stilt walking, which of course is, or play a game of graces. Go on some rides, come on back to the fair, to the cabin.
Well, when you were mentioning the wood carving, I was thinking, back in those days, there's no radio, there's no television, there's nothing in terms of entertainment, so to speak. You had to entertain yourself.
Absolutely.
So you would do wood carving and things like that. Go fishing, probably more so than even kids do nowadays.
Absolutely, absolutely. And not only that, but the time to do that, but also it's expensive. And people have wanted to have beautiful things around them, regardless of whether you could afford it or not, for forever. So if somebody had some artistic talent and time on their hands and some tools, some of the wood carving that people made were just stunning. And so it's not only an occupation, but it could, or an avocation, I should say, but could turn out some really lovely things for the house too.
90th year, we've already established that. So you're doing anything special for the 90th year on your end of the fairgrounds during the fair next week?
Yep, that was what I was mentioning. The cake that we're doing on Thursday during
For the
Senior Day
90-year-olds.
for the 90-year-olds celebrating. We're all celebrating our 90th anniversary, 90 or older. So and then we have the home movies, like I mentioned. Those are the things that we're doing specific.
Oh,
and
specific to the 90th, you're saying?
absolutely.
Okay.
And in that new edition space, we have an exhibit on the wall that sort of talks about the different building expansions we've had and where we've been located over our 90 years.
Has there been thought of doing a display on the fair?
Absolutely, we have, and probably 2018 is probably the year we'll do that.
Yeah, because it's the 160th year since it was incorporated.
Exactly. That's a good way to say it.
Well,
we should suggest that.
I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah,
All I know
absolutely.
is the Rice County Fair Book says this is the 143rd annual fair, and I know I saw that book earlier this week, and that's why I was scratching my head because of that. But the annual is the key word in there.
I would agree, and it may be 158 years since they've been holding fairs, or they've been holding fairs of a sort since 1858. But there are some years that they did not hold fairs, and we know that for sure.
Speaking of history, this is the 40th anniversary of the Fair Queen contest, you know.
I didn't know that. That's
so
cool.
They've invited all past queens in attendance, 120 ladies I think it was, and only one could they not get a hold of.
Wow.
That was pretty good. Kathy Kapp in charge of the Fair Queen contest. Kudos to her for that.
Absolutely.
Only one person they couldn't get a hold of, and over 50 have confirmed they're going to be there this next week.
Oh, well, that's
including
fun.
the first Fair Queen.
Oh, extraordinary. That's great. When is they're having some event?
Tuesday night is when they crown the Queen. We'll be visiting with all of the Queen contestants and the reigning royalty on this show Tuesday from the fair.
That'll be great.
So we're looking forward to that special expanded hour-long version, so folks might want to tune in for that. I'm always fascinated. I've always been a fan of history. And I think it's because my folks, frankly, were old enough to be my grandparents. They started their kids later in life, and I think they gave me more of an appreciation of history than I would have had otherwise.
Well, you know, in my experience, the passion for history comes from people who like stories of people. And you talk to people all the time. You're interviewing. You're really great, by the way, at that, about pulling people's history out during conversations. And history is actually, when you think about it, just the story of the past people. Good stories are always interesting. And yeah, I'm with you. I'm guessing that your parents like to reminisce a bit.
Oh, sure. And, you know, like I said, they were old enough to be my grandparents.
Sure.
So they're talking about things that my friends' parents weren't talking about.
Right, absolutely. Well, and I can remember I didn't actually care for history class because that was memorization of dates and, let's face it, old white dead men. That was the history when I was young.
Yep.
And during the last probably 20 years or so, 30, maybe it's even been 40 years, there's been a change to include other stories, diaries. When we were young, diaries weren't really considered a legitimate source of history. And since then, that's been a change. So I think, actually, today's young people have a much richer storytelling and understanding and appreciation
of
history.
Social media, is that why? Or what?
Well, a little bit of that. I think it's how and what's being taught in school is more interesting. All the details about what life was like. Downton Abbey, the upstairs, downstairs. Nobody ever would have cared what happened downstairs, but when the maids and so on. But we know now that that's actually a really interesting part of life, and so history's expanded and become more interesting, I think.
I mean, I probably, most people would tell you I was kind of weird now, but I was weird as a kid because I and a friend of mine would walk cemeteries in Spring Valley. We'd walk in the cemetery and look at the gravestones because I was fascinated how old these things were.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. In fact, one of our programs earlier this year was actually given by the archivist from St. Olaf College. The program was called Tombstone Tourist for exactly that reason. Walking through the graveyards, you see a story or you see somebody's name. Sometimes there are hints about their life.
Yeah, that was a living person, you know.
Absolutely.
Walked the planet like I do now, way back when.
Right, absolutely. Exactly. And Jeff, of course, took it further and learned a little bit about the people that he saw. But
True.
I think walking cemeteries is actually really fascinating.
Yeah.
And not in a freaky way, but rather in a history way.
Yeah, and I think, well, if I remember right, John Gross, the historian over in Medford,
Mm-hmm.
used to go on walks of the cemeteries, local cemeteries.
I think so too. And I know that Northfield Historical Society, they do a cemetery tour, or cemetery stories is actually what they call them, cemetery stories event near Halloween, October-ish. And that's really interesting.
You know, Lakewood, I think it's Lakewood Cemetery up in Minneapolis, massive cemetery where some famous people like Hubert Humphrey are buried.
Absolutely.
Where a lot of my relatives are.
Oh, cool.
Same cemetery. So you can gather a lot of history in a cemetery.
You sure can.
You know, speaking of that, I do have a little over a minute left of the show. You do have the genealogical services there, right?
We do. There's the Rice County Genealogical Society, which is a separate organization, and they do great things. But yep, we sure do help people with their genealogical research. It's free if you're a member. There's a small fee if you're not a member, although you can always become a member and
That's
then
right. How much
take
is
an
that?
advantage. It's our entry level is senior membership at $20. Individual is $30, and then
For a year.
For a whole year, and it's from the time you join rather than calendar year. So I mean, so if you join in March, you renew in March. And yeah, we're happy to help with all kinds of research projects. There's a genealogical research, but I can't tell you how many coffee clutch arguments we have resolved by somebody trying to remember what happened when and what was in what business where. And
yeah.
What sort of thing.
The buildings downtown.
Absolutely.
What was in the buildings, that sort of thing.
That's right.
Yep. Well, we will see you at the fair next week. We had a special segment again this year. Looking forward to that.
That'd be great. Love to have you.
3 days, I think, next week.
Right, and speaking of free, although we do charge a small amount to get into the museum, all the rest of the outbuildings, all these things in front of the log cabin, everything's free.
And the small amount is?
$2.
Sorry, I have to chuckle every time I hear that. $2.
It's free for kids, and actually, if you come in with a family, we cap it at $5, so it won't cost. Doesn't matter how big your family is, won't cost you more than $5.
And I can peck on a show.